If you're getting ready for a job interview, there's lots of questions you'll have to answer. Behavioural questions could be the most important question type that you'll need to deal with in your next job interview. In this video, we'll take a look at what behavioural questions actually are, why interviewers even ask these types of questions, how you'll know when they're asking you a behavioural question, of course, how to answer them, and I'll explain why I think they're the most important question type you'll have to contend with. So what is a behavioural question? Well, the full description is actually behavioural-based evidence question, and it's where an interviewer will ask you for a specific example of where you've done something in the past, maybe handled a project or dealt with a particular task, but it'll be something quite specific to the role that you're applying for. Now, why would they ask for a specific example of a certain skill or quality? Well, it's based on the premise that if you have a task or a project or some sort of incident that you've had to deal with in the past and you've handled that incident in a certain way, that's a fairly good indication that should the same circumstances arise in the future, that you're likely to handle that situation in the same way that you did in the past. And of course, they want to know that how you have handled a certain situation previously is consistent with the way that they would want you to handle the same situation should it arise in the future if you're the person fulfilling the role. So how will you know when they're asking you a behavioural question? Well, they're fairly easy to spot. Some examples would be, can you tell me a time where you've had to, or could you share an example of when you, of course, each position that's available will have different behavioural questions that are relevant to the requirements of that role. Now, the requirements are the skills and the abilities that you'll need to have to do the work. So a simple Google search for behavioural questions based on the role that you're applying for will give you plenty of specific examples. Some generic ones that overlap different industries and different positions might be things like, can you give an example of where you've had to resolve some type of conflict with a co-worker? Do you have an example you could share where you've used your communication skills to calm an angry customer? Do you have an example you could explain where you've shown leadership in a team environment? Or could you give an example of a situation where you showed a high level of resilience in order to get a project completed on time? So how do we answer a question like that where we need to provide a specific example? Well, the first thing is that in your preparation for your interview, you must have spent some time exploring your experiences, different projects that you've worked on, tasks that you've completed. Look for highlights, things that are not just run-of-the-mill tasks or daily duties, in order to be able to identify good quality experiences that you can leverage in your job interview. You're going to use those experiences to draw on to help you structure your answers to behavioural questions. Now, when structuring your answer to a behavioural question, we need to use a very specific framework. The framework will help keep you on track and make sure that you cover each of the elements that need to be included in a behavioural question answer. Now, a very common framework is the STAR method. Now, STAR simply stands for the situation, the task, the actions you took, and the result. Now, there are plenty of other frameworks that you can use aside from the STAR method. Things like PAS, explain the problem, what actions you took, and then the solution. SAO, situation, actions, outcome. Or CAR, the circumstances, the actions, and the result. Now, it really doesn't matter which of those frameworks you use. They're all essentially the same anyway, in that they provide three basic steps. You first need to explain the circumstances in order to give the interviewer some context. Once you've delivered that information, you can then explain what actions you took. That is, what you actually did in that situation. Then the third part is to outline the result or the outcome of the situation. You might even like to include things that you learned from that situation. Now, when you're using one of these frameworks, be careful not to get bogged down in that first section where you're explaining the situation. The interviewer simply needs enough information to understand the context of the example that you're sharing. Think of it like summarizing a 2-hour movie for a friend. It won't take you even 2 minutes to outline the key points so that your friend understands what the movie's about. The interviewer is looking for the same summary. Then we move into what actions you've taken in that particular situation. Now, this is the most important part of your answer Because when you explain what actions you've taken, when you explain what you did, you're now providing evidence of skills and qualities that the interviewer wants to know about. Outline those actions in dot point format. 1 or 2 sentences to describe what action you took should be enough. Move on to the next one and do the same thing. Now, how many action steps you share is going to depend on the situation. And that's really not that important. What's important is that you provide sufficient evidence to prove your case, to show the interviewer that you've got the skills and the qualities that they're asking about. Now, when you feel you've got the evidence across, you've proven your case, you then need to briefly summarize the outcome of that situation. Keep the outcome concise but specific with a tangible result. You may also want to briefly mention something that you've learned from that situation. Now, a pro tip for you to keep in mind in regards to the structure. We know we have to deliver some context, then our actions, and then an outcome. If that answer takes up 100% of time, allocate only 20% of that time to explain the circumstances to provide context. Spend 70% of the time that you're delivering your answer on the actions that you took. Remember, that's where the evidence is. And then the last 10% should be used to concisely wrap up the outcome and explain what you learned from that situation. If you'd like to go into more depth around behavioral questioning and the STAR method framework, I'll put a link in the description below for you to check that out. I hope that information was helpful for you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.